Okay. Let me share. Here it is. Slideshow. Okay, my name is Robert Landa, and this is my research proposal outline. The research question I want to start with is how does a peer-led autism champion mentorship program, let me move this out of the way, affect the clinical self-efficacy of social workers and the quality of care for neurodivergent youth in a community wellness setting? The types of research that I'll be using is mixed methods. The study will use quantitative surveys to measure changes in clinician confidence, so before and after intervention, and qualitative interviews to understand the how and why behind the changes, answering the general issues of a community found in the Kirby and Payne study. Rational learning and the growth of autism services in clinical social work. The sections included will be the evolution of neurodiversity, affirming practice, the professional development gap in clinical social work, the role of relational learning, and experts by experience. Problem statement and background information. So, traditional professional development for autism spectrum disorder, they usually relied on a medical model approach. So, meaning they focus on the impairments, what's wrong with the kid, why the kid isn't normal, and how to make them fit into society by making them seem more normal, right? And this usually will involve really strict behaviors, which is why a lot of practices like ABA and RBT sometimes are a bit, um, what's the word? Conflicting. There's a lot of controversy. At community-based sites like Free Life Wellness Center, clinicians feel under-equipped to support neurodivergent youth beyond standard talk therapy. Free Life Wellness Center is where I did my previous internship. And I saw as an intern therapist, I would see how unprepared we were to work with this demographic. I did many years in group homes as well as and I worked at a school for children with autism. I tutored children with autism. So all that experience I would see in those areas as well, even then how underprepared people are to give the best services for these children. Current data suggests that while ASD diagnoses are rising, social work confidence in providing specialized neurodiversity affirming care remains low. There is a huge need, a huge need. I think we are light years away from really understanding and giving the best kind of services for these children, for these teens, and even the adults. Um, we don't we that what doesn't work for them, what I noticed that wouldn't work for them was the typical, okay, let's sit down in this four wall space clinical setting and talk about what's going on. Even if we implemented play therapy and all that, sometimes it didn't work because of the setting itself. And I would notice that, and I can see that my kids weren't progressing and weren't getting worse either. But being stagnant in therapy isn't a good sign. Research question hypothesis. Quantitative hypothesis. Clinicians who participate in the Autism Champion Mentorship Program will show a statistically significant increase in self-efficacy scores regarding ASD interventions compared to those receiving standard training. The Autism Champion, it's just a program I looked up, and the way they give services to these kids again is done differently than most places how they give their services, and I'll talk about what kind of services they give and how they did it. Qualitative question: what specific aspects of peer-led relational learning do clinicians identify as the most transformative for their clinical practice with neurodivergent populations? This just means, again, learning by doing. I think especially that population, it wasn't about talking, it wasn't about even showing them a video, right? It was let's do it together. In this moment where you're having a crisis, let's work on it. Let me talk you through it, and I need you to do your best. The literature I used, existing research really makes it a point that there is a gap between research to practice. We have the evidence, we have the information, we have the interventions, but they're not being used in the community. They're not being used during these moments that maybe may be hard or in schools, right, or in therapy. Kirby and Payne identified that learning from autistic individuals is more useful than learning through, again, traditional training, ABA. However, research at the micro level shows clinicians struggle with imposter syndrome when treating ASD, which I would see it a lot. A lot of people would say, like, I feel unequipped. I feel like I'm just wasting their time. At the meso level, the agency schedule is too packed to allow for the teamwork and community building required to fix systems at the higher level. At the macro level, policy often prioritizes cost-effective short-term behavior goals over long-term relationship-based outcomes. Again, all of this isn't tailored towards individuals with autism. This might work for a kid in a group home. This might work for a kid that's struggling at school, making friends. This even works for kids with, trauma, but for kids with autism, this is not going to work. The theory. The study will use the social model of disability and the community of practice framework. The social model moves the focus from fixing the child to removing environmental and social barriers. I'm using Wagner's idea that people learn best by being part of a group. This theory helped design the autism champion model, where learning happens through sharing and working together. And data analysis. The software was SPSS for quantitative data. I used that during my undergrad. It was pretty easy, very user-friendly for anybody. It's not even that expensive either. The NVivo for qualitative thematic analysis. Quantitative variables included the clinician self-efficacy scale, that's the dependent variable, and the training type, which is the independent variable, measured through Likert scales, statistical test, paired samples t-test. Qualitative, this is done by talking to people and letting them tell us their stories, listening to their own words, and then reading, right, what they said, labeling what's important, grouping together those labels to just have it more organized, to make it make more sense. This will help us find the big picture results, like how empathy changes people and what workplace problems are standing in their way. Methods. A mixed methods approach is used to provide a holistic, more natural view. The quantitative phase allows for objective measurement of growth across a larger staff sample at Free Life Wellness Center, while the qualitative phase sees the nuances of clinician experiences. This design was chosen because quantitative data alone cannot show the lived experience of professional growth, and qualitative data alone lacks the numbers needed to influence agency-wide policy. Implications. This research is so important for improving service for children with autism and teens with autism. It argues that social work education needs to move towards neurodiversity affirming relational models, meaning we have to take into account their culture. Autism is a culture. We have to take into account um, the way they cope, their stimming, the way they ground. We have to take into consideration our even our language inclusion, right? All of this is just to make sure it's tailored towards them and not making it easier for us to give them services. If it's convenient, it's probably not working. If successful, this model can be used to change agency policy, moving away from rigid billing structures toward collaborative learning time to improve human behavior outcomes for client through empathetic and skilled care. One of the biggest things I think I would always say at my internship was the insurance policy doesn't care what the kid has, as long as it's serious enough that it makes them feel like it's worth billing the services, right? So I've always been like, we need to move away from that. We need to not really care about that. I know it's important. That's how we get our money. But these kids aren't getting anything. We are wasting their time. That imposter syndrome, maybe it's reasonable why they would feel that way is because I think they were wasting time. They were implementing things that weren't helping, and these kids weren't getting anything out of it. But the relationships we build with the kids, that in itself was useful. They would see us as a safe place, as safe people, as people they can trust. Impact of cultural diversity and oppression. The study addresses the white British limitation of previous research by focusing on a diverse urban population, so from the city. It examines how neuronormative expectations often intersect with racial and class-based oppression. An example of this is the overdiagnosis of this kid is just misbehaving, they're too chatty, they're just a troublemaker, in black male youths versus ASD. The research will assess how culture backgrounds of both the clinician and the family influence the acceptance of neurodivergent identities. Ethics. According with the NASW Code of Ethics, you have the standards of cultural awareness and diversity and competence. This study guarantees informed consent and voluntary participation. It's going to protect the individual's rights and their ethics. A primary ethical focus is the protection of vulnerable populations. Autism is a spectrum, so you might have kids that are more aware and they might understand, but then you have nonverbal kiddos. You might have kiddos that are in the middle that lack a lot. Making sure that the autistic consultants are compensated fairly for their labor and that their insights are not exploited for professional gain without recognition. Giving them the credit where credit's due. Recommendations, agency policy, formalize autism champion roles within social work agencies, providing 2 hours of protected mentorship time per week. Intervention, implement naturalistic environments for therapy. So, hey, you know what? A lot of things I would see that I miss about the group homes is a lot of these individuals that did have autism, they might have been overstimulated at the group home because of the setting, the environment, their peers. So when we would see that, not only would we pull them away, but we sometimes would take them somewhere. Hey, let's go for a drive. We'll play your favorite music. Let's go to the beach. This was in San Diego. Let's go to the park. I know you like playing basketball, or you just like going in circles around the park, taking laps. This is very important. Um, Education, integrate experts by experience into master social work curriculum. I think, again, it's easy as a white neurotypical male to tell the vulnerable population what's best for them. We need to hear from the people themselves. We need to hear from people with autism what is working. These are my references. Thank you.